Hello, gunfighters, and welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting and gun-related stuff the right way with God at the center. Gonna try something a little bit different. You guys are probably familiar if you've listened for any length of time. The Better Know Cartridge episodes. They're kind of short episodes on a pretty particular topic, so I think I'm gonna forego the lengthy bio. Try to abbreviate it. First and foremost, I am a Christian. That is number one in my life, serving God, following Jesus. Combat veteran, served in the United States Marine Corps and the Army. Also law enforcement veteran, private contractor, state rifle and pistol champion. Pretty succinct. You want to support? Go to Patreon. Should be a link in the show notes. Boom. Let's get into the day's cartridge. Alright. Get ready for some controversy. Today's episode may be more divisive than most other Cartridge versus episodes. Today, we are comparing the top two intermediate cartridges of our time for right now. And since the Cold War, really. So, Cold War, 1960s and on. I know the Cold War started before that, but we started using this cartridge. The other one predates it. You may have guessed by now, we're talking about, in one corner, the Red Army cartridge. The 122/123 grain. 7.62 by 39. The Red Army cartridge. First in the SKS, but most notably by far, the AK-47 platform round. And in the red, white, and blue corner, from America and adopted by NATO, the 5.56/223 cartridge. At most commonly 55, 62, and now the heavy hitter 77 grain. This is going to be a controversial episode. I'm going to come at this from hopefully a fair and objective point of view. Now, obviously, I'm American. I have fought for this country. I have been to war more than once for this nation. I fought with an M16. The first time for the invasion of Iraq with an M16A2, and then later, with my last deployment, up to the M16A4 in the United States Marine Corps Infantry. However, I consider myself pretty unbiased in this, in that my M16 and that round had a catastrophic failure right in the middle of an invasion. Catastrophic failure meaning like it couldn't be fixed. It wasn't a tap rack bang scenario. It wasn't a double feed. It wasn't even a bolt override. It was had to go to an armorer. Gun was broken. And I carried an AK for a time during the war. We'll call it a more specialized assignment. Operating in Baghdad. I was very blessed during the war that God kept me safe. I don't know that blessed is the right word to describe this, but I had a very unique opportunity to be in Baghdad just before it collapsed. During the invasion, we, let's say, got there early. I operated out of a safe house, I don't think is saying too much, with some other people. And I carried an AK for a short time. And I really liked that weapon. So, and I've got experience with both since then. And I know enough about ballistics. If something's better, if a round's better, I don't like to trust my life to things based on what's cool on Instagram or based on sentimentality. So I think we all have our own biases and things like that. But if you think that I'm just going to be, because it's American all the time, saying that the 5.56 is better, I'm not. For some things, I'll be honest, I think it is better. And for some things, I think the 7.62 by 39 is better. With that said, with that preamble, long and drawn out, and all the caveats, because I know this is probably going to be a controversial episode, let's get into the topic du jour. What does that mean? That's the topic of the day. That sounds good. I think I'll have that. Let's talk about these two cartridges. Both intermediate cartridges. Neither one the first intermediate cartridge. I'd say neither one the first successful warfighting intermediate cartridge. But the two dominant ones, again, since the Cold War and into today. Intermediate, meaning it is somewhere between, I'm using the traditional term of intermediate, it's in between a full-powered rifle round, contrary to what the media or you may may have been told if you just got into guns recently, the 5.56 is not a very powerful round compared to most traditional rifle rounds, even compared to like a 243, which is a very, I would say, on the minimum end of the scale for deer hunting. It's much less powerful than a 243. Or the 7.62x39 is far less powerful than its full power counterpart, the 7.62x54R. It shoots a lighter bullet at less velocity in both cases. It's an intermediate. It's between, or let's say below, a full-powered rifle round, 7.62x51 NATO or 7.62x54R Russian, and it's well above traditional pistol rounds, whether that be 45 ACP or 9x19 9mm. It's far more powerful than that, but far less powerful than most traditional full-powered rifle rounds. It's an intermediate round. Both of them are with different philosophies. And I should say, from what I know, by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter is established. From what I understand, the Red Army, traditional rifle cartridge for a long time, since World War I and before, the main infantry rifle cartridge, the 7.62x54R, that's a full power rifle cartridge. They wanted an intermediate rifle cartridge. They saw the distances that engagements realistically were happening. See this on pretty much every side, and starting in World War I, they had these rifles marked out, the Russians and Martians, which I think, and a little aside, is an ingenious term of measurement, marked out to like 1,000 Martians or even farther. And us in the American military and the Brits, they had these really long distances marked out on the rifles. And then they realized in World War I and World War II that engagements usually happen a lot quicker and a lot closer than that, especially in urban warfare, which is a mainstay of modern warfighting. And they looked at the common engagement distances, and they started moving more towards and mass issuing more semi-automatic and submachine gun type weapons. The Soviets looked at this, and they developed a cartridge, same caliber, same 7.62, which in the Russians is a little bit different than ours, should be .3112 diameter bullet. But, close enough to .308. And they said, let's keep this bullet diameter, let's shorten it, make it more compact, let's make it good out to reasonable ranges, 300 meters. And they made the 7.62x39. Now, if you are familiar with European designations on cartridges, after the X, the number is the length of the case in millimeters. 54 is quite a bit more than 39. And that has to deal with your cartridge powder capacity. It's far less powerful, but still pretty potent. You look at that 39 versus, and it's not the same because pistol powder versus rifle powder is different, but to give you a rough idea, versus a 9x19 versus 54, you got the 39. It's right in there. It's an intermediate cartridge. And they did a good job. It has proven itself so effective that I would just be guessing at the number of nations that adopted it. Now, part of that was due to the Soviet Union, but we still see countries today that haven't been part of the Soviet Union for a long time using 7.62x39. Why? Because it works. And it works well. Most engagements are 300 meters and in. It's not such a big and heavy cartridge that you can't have 30-round magazines with it and carry a full combat loadout. And it's effective. It's effective at those ranges. It's effective, again, first came out in the SKS, which is a fantastic rifle, but most notably in the AK. So that pairing was very effective and has been and continues to be effective. Now let's look at the Cartridges of the World book. I like to keep, that was a gift from a patron. If you want to become a patron and support the podcast, there should be a link in the show notes. Anyway, I'm going to go to Cartridges of the World, and I'm going to try and keep it pretty fair and go to similar sources. I don't want to favor one even inadvertently over another. This manual, the Cartridges of the World, lists a military load, 122 grain. You'll often see 123 grain. It's academic difference, really, at 23.29. 122 grain, 23.29 at 1470 for foot-pounds of energy. All right, now let's talk about the 5.56. And I know there are differences. Between the 5.56 and 223. I'm very aware of that. But for today's discussion, let's say for downrange performances, the differences are academic. In real world, it really makes no difference. Make sure you can fire appropriate ammunition out of your rifle If you blow yourself or somebody else up inadvertently, it's your fault, not mine. Now, let's talk about the 5.56, because we went a different route. Instead of taking the 30-06, which we had, or shortly after that, the 7.62 by 51 NATO round, the 308, for all intents and purposes, again, put the right ammo in the right gun. But instead of making a shorter version of that, which would have given us something fairly or much more similar to the Soviet round, we decided to go a, let's say, for the time, pretty radically different way. And by we, I'm talking AR Stoner designed the AR-10, later AR-15. I'm sure other people had a hand in it. To the Defense Department, Air Force took a look at it. They said, we like what you're doing here. Anyway, for all intents and purposes, prior to this, these very high velocity, small caliber rounds were known as varmint rounds. And that's really where they exist today in the civilian market, aside from ARs and stuff. If you look at really small bore, high velocity rounds, in general, outside of this arena, we're talking about hunting, you're talking about varmint rounds. And it still is a fantastic varmint round. Instead of just getting a similar diameter bullet and making it a little bit less powerful, they decided to go with a much smaller diameter. You're talking 22 caliber. Initial loadings, I believe, in 55 grain. We just mentioned the Soviet round in 122 grain, which is already quite a bit lighter than their full power round. But this, 55 grains. Now, when NATO settled on it, they went to a 62 grain. But even so, 62 grain, that's for rough math, right? That's about half. And you might think, well, that's quite a bit less powerful. Well, hold your horses. I said high velocity. Whereas the Russian kind of idea was to take a similar diameter bullet and a little bit less weight and a little bit less velocity. Americans, let's get a small diameter bullet and push it to really high velocities. So we look at this list of military load in the cartridges of the world. 55 grain, full metal jacket, boat tail at 3250. And with an energy of 1290. So again, 55 grain, 3250 at 1290. I do believe these are going to be out of a 20-inch barrel per the M16. Today, the M4 is much more common. You're going to drop some velocity there, but let's stick with these numbers for a minute. And I mentioned that NATO settled on the 62 grain. This doesn't list the 62 grain military load, but it lists the 62 grain commercial load, which should be fairly similar at 62 grains, 3,000 feet a second, with 1239. Now, if we look at the most energy of both those loads, 1290 at the 55 grain, it's still less than the load we quoted for the 7.62 by 39, which came in at 1470. So if you quantify energy with foot-pounds, right? Force equals mass times velocity squared. Then just on pure power, the Soviet round gets it. It's more powerful. You can argue with that and throw a fit, but if you quantify that the way that physics quantifies that, then the Soviet cartridge wins. I didn't say more effective, so settle down. I said the most energy, foot-pounds. And that's comparing that load to a 20-inch barrel. You're going to lose quite a bit of velocity, which the 5.56 depends on going to a 16-inch barrel, which I'd say today is far more common. The Marine Corps still sticks to their 20-inch barrel, and I think there's a lot of good reasons for that. But most of the rest of the military, the Army, and things like that have gone to the M4, the 16-inch barrel. And the AK-47 has basically always been, let's call it for argument's sake, a 16-inch barrel. I looked up two sources outside of that, one of them being Wikipedia. And pretty close if you drop down, just for argument's sake, to the 16-inch barrel, you're looking at around 28 and some change for that. Most common today, NATO round, the M855 62 grain. So you are giving up some velocity going to the more common 16-inch barrel, and you're obviously, by that measure, going to give up some energy and some power. That's how that works. So if we look at pure power, most powerful cartridge, the AK round is going to get that, right? The 7.62 by 39 is going to get that. And that makes sense, and that bears out what I've seen in real life. Round for round, the 7.62 is more powerful round for round. Now let's talk about the philosophies of this. They're quite a bit different, right? A bigger, heavier, much closer to traditional rifle bullet weight at a moderate velocity. That's kind of the AK philosophy. The 5.56 NATO philosophy is let's get a lightweight, small caliber projectile and push it really fast, which is going to give us our lethality, our effectiveness. Lethality is probably not the right word because I don't even know that that's what's most important on a battlefield. You want to take an enemy soldier out of the fight. Killing them or not is kind of inconsequential to you. You're not there to murder people. You're there to win a confrontation. Come out on the winning side of that. We talked about power. And I think the 7.62-39, just however you want to measure that, gets that. Now, let's talk about power to weight ratio. And the clear winner there is the 5.56. I think that was the main reason they were looking at this round. You could carry more ammo with less weight. And if you've ever been a soldier, a marine, rucking, humping, tremendous amount of weight, as we had to, it's miserable. If you can lighten up a little bit of that weight, I think that greatly increases combat effectiveness. The heaviest part of a round is the projectile, especially when it's made of lead. There are other components, the brass or steel, and the powder and the primers, but lead is heavy, right? And there's some new lead-free rounds and things like that, but the projectile weight adds up. 7.62x39 ammo is heavier, and the magazines, for that matter, without getting too much off topic, are heavier. So a 30-round mag of 7.62-39 weighs more than a fully loaded mag of 5.56. This should come as a shock to no one. So power to weight ratio. You start strapping a soldier, a marine, a comrade down with whatever. Body armor, helmet, radio, a couple of grenades, first aid gear, all that stuff adds up quick. Let's say the allotted amount that a soldier can move freely with and carry combat effective amount of ammo, let's say it's 50 pounds, and I'm just making up a number. Let's say 50 pounds of that is allotted for ammo. Well, you can carry a lot more ammo in that 50 pounds if it's 5.56 versus 7.62x39. So again, power to weight ratio, I think that clearly goes to the 5.56. Again, that's a big reason I think they adopted it. You can carry more ammo, certainly more than the 7.62x51, the NATO round that preceded it. Alright, now let's do a deep dive into a couple more of the aspects of these cartridges. Recoil. Now, neither one of these is what you would call a heavy recoiling cartridge. I will concede that. And some people, because of that, will go, 7.62x39 recoil is nothing. But it's not nothing, it's something. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. If you have more energy going out of the front of the barrel, you have more energy coming back into the shooter, you, or whomever that shooter might be. And I don't care how good you control recoil, and you can control recoil very well. If you reduce the recoil, you can shoot a given target size, all other factors being equal, and are generally not. Assuming you're up to the task and your body mechanics and your fundamentals are good enough, you can get repeated hits on a target or shoot multiple targets faster with less recoil, and that has real world advantages. Let me give you an example. Let's say you have, I'm going to use an AR for this. You could easily just use an AK in both calibers, but let's say you have an AR, and they do make ARs chambered in 7.62x39 and 5.56. Let's say you have two guns. Other than the chambering, mostly they're going to be different, right? But mostly identical. Same weight, same barrel length, same optical sight. You got an aim point on top of both. Both are zeroed to the exact same target you're shooting at. You're going to even negate that. Say you have a man-sized target, 300 meters. How fast you can get 4 hits on target if you have good fundamentals and can take advantage of that recoil. To reduce the recoil, you can do it faster. And you don't know all the time on real-world targets. It's going to be the first round or the second round or the third round that changes that person's behavior. That behavior being them trying to kill me or my friends or my colleagues or my comrades, depending if you're on the other side, right? So if we're talking cartridge to cartridge, there's less recoil in the 5.56. Let's talk about another aspect, trajectory. This is another thing, like you can get mad about it if you want, but the 5.56, 55 grain, 62 grain is going to have a flatter trajectory than the 7.62 by 39. Now 7.62 by 39 is not bad out to 300 meters, but it's not as flat as 5.56. And you can shoot long range with calibers that have really arching trajectories, like a 300 Blackout. If you know the exact distance and you're on a static range and you know your holdover and you can dial it in on a scope. But if we're talking about battlefield conditions, like you got multiple people popping up on a battlefield. One's at 50 meters, one's at 175, and one's at, 285. And you have to engage those targets. Sometimes it's a whole silhouette, sometimes it's just a head and shoulders. Sometimes it's just a head. The ability to have a flatter trajectory and a longer point blank range, meaning I can aim at the center of that given target and hit it somewhere in the acceptable area, is going to be flatter, therefore longer distance, with the 5.56 than the 7.62 by 39. So you got that going for the 5.56. Let's talk about some other differences. If you talk about cartridge dimensions, I think there is a clear advantage to the 7.62 by 39. It's a highly tapered cartridge, which means that aids greatly in extraction. Going back to what I briefly mentioned during the war. As Marines, we were just kind of relentless about keeping our guns clean. Well, if you're in Iraq during the invasion and it's a literal sandstorm going on and you go to use your rifle and you rip the back of the cartridge that's in your chamber, it will not extract. It will not do it. You can't get it done. And how many times you run that bolt and that extractor over there, it strips it out, and the force of that round in the chamber is greater than the force of that extractor pulling it rearward. No matter how many times you repeat and do that, that round will not come out. Because if you look at a 5.56 round, there's a lot of surface area in that chamber, and it's not exactly straight all the way to the bottleneck, but it's much less tapered than the 7.62 by 39. The AK is renowned for its reliability for many reasons, but part of that is because of that massive taper in the case. I like that. That's a good design feature. Anything that can aid in extraction and therefore aid in reliability of a cartridge is a good thing. So for cartridge dimensions, I think that kind of goes to 7.62 by 39. Also, there's something to be said for a heavier projectile. I talked about power, and clearly the 7.62 is a more powerful round. But if you look at doctrine, it's not uncommon to be taught in the Marines and the Army to shoot a target multiple times, especially after, the global war on terror, whatever you want to call it. I don't know that you could quantify this, and you can disagree, and that'd be fine, but I would say round per round effectiveness. You're talking about like torso hits on a military age male. I would say that round for round, the 7.62 is not only more powerful, it's more effective. Even though it's going at a lower velocity, it has much more mass. You're talking about double the mass of the projectile. And also, that aids in barrier penetration. Now, you may say, well, NATO's common round is the what we call penetrator round, light armor piercing, got a tungsten tip on it. And you can kind of get around it that way and aid the 5.56 in barrier penetration. But if you're comparing apples to apples, if you were comparing that to a armor penetrating round in 7.62 by 39, I still think it would win. So if you're just talking straight ball round to ball round, you're talking about barrier penetration, whether that be just a Toyota Hilux with a couple of radical Islamic terrorists in the back of it, or a light armored vehicle on the plains of Mongolia, right? The 7.62 by 39, I think, gets a nudge because of that. Here's where we're getting to some gray area. We, as America, have embraced the 5.56 223 for a long time, and we have some really good rounds now for it. Not just the military rounds, but for a lot of things, civilian rounds are really good, in some cases better. I would never advise you, if you're protecting your home with a 5.56 or it's your truck gun, maybe have a magazine of the armor-piercing stuff, but do not have that as your go-to defensive ammo. There's much better choices. You got a lot of really good soft point ammo. Spear Gold Dot makes a round for the 5.56. A lot of R&D over decades has gone into that round. I'd say more so than the 7.62 by 39. You can get some good soft pointed rounds and stuff for the 7.62 by 39, but not to the extent I think that you can the Black Hill 77 grain, kind of known as the heavy hitter in the AR world. So you get a little bit of advantage there, just commercialism and capitalism and R&D. I think you get more of that in the 5.56. Even with that, though, if you're talking about a medium game hunting round for deer size game, I talked about this a little bit in the 30-30 versus 7.62 by 39. The 7.62 by 39 in its regular guys, you're talking about the dirt cheapest, what most people have, 122, 123 grain Tula, Wolf ammo. It's a poor choice for medium game hunting. Sure, you can do it. Maybe your Uncle Ned's barber one time shot a deer out of his truck with 123 grain full metal jacket, 7.62 39. That doesn't make it a good deer round. But if you are judicious about ammo selection and go to some of the rounded, soft point, really good, more geared towards hunting and terminal performance ammo, the 7.62 by 39 is a good choice, and it can be a better choice, I think, than even the best of the 5.56. And I know that's going to make people angry because a lot of people hunt and have their kids hunt with 223s and ARs, and you can get really good bullets for that, as we already discussed. And I did a whole episode on hunting with the AR-15. But talking to somebody that's killed a lot of big game animals and has been a professional big game hunter and guide, again, you made the platforms the same. You gave me a Howa Mini Action, which is a bolt action rifle primarily made for hunting, and you said you're going to go out and deer hunt. You can either have it chambered in 7.62 by 39 or 223. I'm going to take it in 7.62 by 39. So for that, I think the 7.62 by 39 gets it. All right, so in summation here, what do I think is the best in 2023 Battlefield cartridge? Not weapon. We're leaving weapon out of this. We're talking about cartridge, right? Because I can get a really good weapons platform. I can get a Galil Ace in 5.56, and I can get a Galil Ace in 7.62 by 39. And let's just run with that. Let's just assume that was my option. Battlefield weapon. Go fight. Go to war. I'm going to pick the 5.56 for a battlefield. If that's my only thing, not like I'm getting dropped behind enemy lines as a paratrooper and I have to scavenge ammo, but like I have a legitimate logistical supply chain. That's not part of it. Just which one is a better cartridge for a modern battlefield? I'm picking the 5.56. I'm picking it because it's got a flatter trajectory and it's got less recoil, and I think I can get faster first, second, third round hits on target. Also, the weight, right? If I can carry the same amount of rounds with less weight, sign me up. So for battlefield implementation, I think the 5.56 is superior. Now, let's look at this. I'm a prepper. I'm a survivalist. I don't apologize for that. Continuing to breathe air is nice. If I'm talking about like a one gun, and this would not be it, right? I've talked about this before. If I was picking one long gun to bug out and start peeing in radiators or fight bad guys armed with chainsaws under an overpass, pick your apocalyptic movie. If I was picking that kind of scenario, like a survival prepper tool, I had to choose one of these cartridges. I wouldn't choose either one to begin with. I would choose a shotgun, and I've talked about that a lot. And if I was not choosing that, I'd probably choose my Scar 17 if you said it has to be a rifle. Because I think 7.62 51 NATO is probably the best all-around cartridge for tactical and hunting and all that stuff, a best crossover. But out of these two, if you said you have to pick a 5.56 or a 7.62 by 39 for survival scenario, and you don't really get any more specifics, for a survival type scenario, I'm going to go 7.62 by 39. If you give me those same two Galil Aces, and I like the Galil Ace, I've got quite a bit of practical experience with it. For a while, it was my go-to truck gun. And one of the reasons is because I was in charge of a pretty cool assignment in the military where I had a pretty big area of operation between in Idaho, the upper part of Idaho, in between the Washington border and the Montana border, and a just plain government issued ride. And that was a good truck gun because there's a lot of big animals out there. And if I had to choose one of these to hunt, and put food on the table, 7.62 by 39 gets the nod. Also, round per round, I think it's more effective. Do I have to carry less ammo? Yes. But if I don't have a supply chain that's supplying me with more and more rounds, again, I go back to I think that round for round, changing an adversary's behavior, round for round, the likelihood is better with the 7.62 by 39. And if I don't have a supply chain, which I wouldn't in the apocalypse probably, right? Supplying me with truckloads of ammo and stripper clips, it's going to have what I have. I'm probably going to go 7.62 by 39. I think it's a better crossover cartridge. It's better at that medium-sized game. I would hopefully have some rounds tailored for that. Know my dope, know my zero, all that stuff. But I think for an all-around survival round, the 7.62 by 39 gets it. So, in summation, trying to come at this objectively, soberly, looking at these two cartridges and giving you an honest, it's still an opinion, but an opinion of mine based hopefully on facts and real world stuff. That's my summation of these two cartridges. I hope you enjoyed that about this podcast. If you want to support, you can scroll down to the Patreon link, but also, I don't often mention it. There's a gear shop. You can go to goodshepherdtraining.com. Again, goodshepherdtraining.com. If you don't want to just become a patron and be part of that insider tribe, but you want something tangible for your money, I get that. There's a gear shop at goodshepherdtraining.com. Stuff for both this Gunfighter Life podcast and the Alpha Male podcast. So you might want to check that out. Again, that's goodshepherdtraining.com. With that, the tactical tip of the day. Whether you're talking AR-15s or AK-47s, you have a front sight post, right? It's not like a lot of traditional bolt-action hunting rifles. You have quite a big height over bore, meaning the sights are higher by quite a bit than the barrel of that gun. The front sight will have a section below the front sight. You can make a very crude up-close CQB aiming device by taking an obnoxious color of, let's say, duct tape, bright orange, chartreuse, bright pink if you want to go that route. And you can put a section of that on there. That way, if you're really close, down and dirty, right? Crude aiming of that in urban warfare CQB distances, you can use that as a very crude front sight. Worry about its relationship to the rear sight at very close distances. It makes very little difference. And getting rounds, especially a first round hit on target quickly, is important. So that, also if you don't want to do that, the duct tape can also do a really obnoxious color of white fingernail polish, followed by, again, bright pink, bright orange, chartreuse, fingernail polish. There you go, a manly use for fingernail polish. The bottom of that front sight post, a bright color so you can index on it quickly. Now, if you want to take a more precise shot, when you go to get a proper sight picture, you shouldn't be able to see it anyway if your front sight is properly aligned into your rear aperture, whether it's a peep sight for the M16 or the more traditional notch sight of the AK-47. You shouldn't see it, so it shouldn't interfere with your more precise shooting. But it can help you quickly drive that muzzle towards the target and get rounds off quick and with an acceptable amount of CQB accuracy. So that's your tactical tip of the day. Tactical verse of the day. Tying into kind of our topic today, Leviticus 19. You shall do no injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor defer to the great, but you are to judge your neighbor fairly. You should be fair in all your dealings. It brings to mind another verse. You shall not have in your bag differing weights, a heavy and a light. You shall not have in your house a differing measure, a large and a small. You shall have a perfect and a just weight and a perfect and a just measure. Be a man. Stop judging based on emotion or what you want, or because somebody gives you a bribe, or any of those things. Judge with fair and honest judgment. With that, men, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.